Have you ever dreamed of waking up to the sound of mountain bells, chasing goats across sunny meadows, or sipping warm goat's milk with a mischievous friend? Meet Heidi, a bright-eyed little girl with a heart full of wonder, whose adventures begin when she travels to the high peaks of the Swiss Alps in this timeless bedtime story for kids. Chapter 1. The little old town of Mayenfeld is charmingly situated. From it, a footpath leads through green, well-wooded stretches to the foot of the heights, which look down imposingly upon the valley. Where the footpath begins to go steeply and abruptly up the Alps, the heath, with its short grass and pungent herbage, at once sends out its soft perfume to meet the wayfarer. One bright sunny morning in June, a tall, vigorous maiden of the mountain region climbed up the narrow path, leading a little girl by the hand. The youngster's cheeks were in such a glow that it showed even through her sun-browned skin. Small wonder, though, for in spite of the heat, the little one, who was scarcely 5 years old, was bundled up as if she had to brave a bitter frost. Her shape was difficult to distinguish, for she wore 2 dresses, if not 3, and around her shoulders a large red cotton shawl. With her feet encased in heavy hobnailed boots, this hot and shapeless little person toiled up the mountain. The pair had been climbing for about an hour when they reached a hamlet halfway up the great mountain named the Alm. This hamlet was called I am Durfli, or the little village. It was the elder girl's hometown, and therefore she was greeted from nearly every house. People called to her from windows and doors, and very often from the road. But answering questions and calls as she went by, the girl did not loiter on her way and only stood still when she reached the end of the hamlet. There a few cottages lay scattered about, from the furthest of which a voice called out to her through an open door. "Dita, please wait 1 moment. I am coming with you if you are going further up." When the girl stood still to wait, the child instantly let go her hand and promptly sat down on the ground. "Are you tired, Heidi?" Dita asked the child. "No, but hot," she replied. "We shall be up in an hour if you take big steps and climb with all your little might." Thus the elder girl tried to encourage her small companion. A stout, pleasant-looking woman stepped out of the house and joined the two. The child had risen and wandered behind the old acquaintances, who immediately started gossiping about their friends in the neighborhood and the people of the hamlet generally. "Where are you taking the child, Dita?" asked the newcomer. "Is she the child your sister left?" "Yes," Dita assured her. "I am taking her up to the Amuncle, and there I want her to remain." "You can't really mean to take her there, Dita. You must have lost your senses to go to him. I am sure the old man will show you the door and won't even listen to what you say." "Why not? As he's her grandfather, it is high time he should do something for the child. I have taken care of her until this summer, and now a good place has been offered to me. The child shall not hinder me from accepting it, I tell you that. It would not be so hard if he were like other mortals, but you know him yourself. How could he look after a child, especially such a little one? She'll never get along with him, I am sure of that. But tell me of your prospects." "I am going to a splendid house in Frankfurt. Last summer some people went off to the baths and I took care of their rooms. As they got to like me, they wanted to take me along, but I could not leave. They have come back now and have persuaded me to go with them." "I am glad I am not the child," exclaimed Barbara with a shudder. "Nobody knows anything about the old man's life up there. He doesn't speak to a living soul, and from one year's end to the other he keeps away from church. People get out of his way when he appears once in a 12-month down here among us. We all fear him, and he is really just like a heathen or an old Indian, with those thick gray eyebrows and that huge, uncanny beard. When he wanders along the road with his twisted stick, we are all afraid to meet him alone." "That is not my fault," said Dita stubbornly. "He won't do her any harm, and if he should, he is responsible, not I. I wish I knew what weighs on the old man's conscience. Why are his eyes so fierce, and why does he live up there all alone? Nobody ever sees him, and we hear many strange things about him. Didn't your sister tell you anything, Dita? Of course she did, but I shall hold my tongue. He would make me pay for it if I didn't. Barbara had long been anxious to know something about the old uncle and why he lived apart from everybody. Nobody had a good word for him, and when people talked about him, they did not speak openly, but as if they were afraid. She could not even explain to herself why he was called the uncle. He could not possibly be the uncle of all the people in the village, but since everybody spoke of him so, she did the same. Barbara, who had only lived in the village since her marriage, was glad to get some information from her friend. Dita had been bred there, but since her mother's death had gone away to earn her livelihood. She confidentially seized Dita's arm and said, I wish you would tell me the truth about him, Dita. You know it all, people only gossip. Tell me, what has happened to the old man to turn everybody against him so? Did he always hate his fellow creatures? I cannot tell you whether he always did, and that for a very good reason. He being 60 years old and I only 26, you can't expect me to give you an account of his early youth. But if you'll promise to keep it to yourself and not set all the people in Predigan talking, I can tell you a good deal. My mother and he both came from Domleshk. How can you talk like that, Dita? Replied Barbara in an offended tone. People do not gossip much in Predigan, and I always can keep things to myself if I have to. You won't repent of having told me, I assure you. All right, but keep your word, said Dita warningly. Then she looked around to see that the child was not so close to them as to overhear what might be said, but the little girl was nowhere to be seen. While the two young women had talked at such a rate, they had not noticed her absence. Quite a while must have elapsed since the little girl had given up following her companions. Dita, standing still, looked about her everywhere, but no one was on the path, which, except for a few curves, was visible as far down as the village. There she is, can't you see her there? Exclaimed Barbara, pointing to a spot a good distance from the path. She is climbing up with the goatherd Peter and his goats. I wonder why he is so late today. I must say, it suits us well enough. He can look after the child while you tell me everything without being interrupted. It will be very easy for Peter to watch her, remarked Dita. She is bright for her 5 years and keeps her eyes wide open. I have often noticed that, and I am glad for her, for it will be useful with the uncle. He has nothing left in the whole wide world but his cottage and 2 goats. Did he once have more? Asked Barbara. I should say so. He was heir to a large farm in Domleshk, but setting up to play the fine gentleman, he soon lost everything with drink and play. His parents died with grief, and he himself disappeared from these parts. After many years he came back with a half-grown boy. His son, Tobias, that was his name, became a carpenter and turned out to be a quiet, steady fellow. Many strange rumors went round about the uncle, and I think that was why he left Domleshk for Durfley. We acknowledged relationship, my mother's grandmother being a cousin of his. We called him uncle, and because we are related on my father's side to nearly all the people in the hamlet, they too all called him uncle. He was named Uncle when he moved up to the But what happened to Tobias? Asked Barbara eagerly. Just wait. How can I tell you everything at once? Exclaimed Dita. Tobias was an apprentice in Mel's, and when he was made master, he came home to the village and married my sister Adelheid. They always had been fond of each other, and they lived very happily as man and wife. But their joy was short. 2 years afterwards, when Tobias was helping to build a house, a beam fell on him and killed him. Adelheid was thrown into a violent fever with grief and fright, and never recovered from it. She had never been strong and had often suffered from queer spells, when we did not know whether she was awake or asleep. Only a few weeks after Tobias's death, they buried poor Adelheid. People said that heaven had punished the uncle for his misdeeds. After the death of his son, he never spoke to a living soul. Suddenly he moved up to the Alp, to live there at enmity with God and man. My mother and I took Adelheid's little year-old baby, Heidi, to live with us. When I went to Ragatz, I took her with me, But in the spring, the family whose work I had done last year came from Frankfurt and resolved to take me to their townhouse. I am very glad to get such a good position. And now you want to hand over the child to this terrible old man. I really wonder how you can do it, Dita, said Barbara with reproach in her voice. It seems to me I have really done enough for the child. I do not know where else to take her, as she is too young to come with me to Frankfurt. By the way, Barbara, where are you going? We are halfway up the Alm already. Dita shook hands with her companion and stood still while Barbara approached the tiny, dark brown mountain hut, which lay in a hollow a few steps away from the path. Situated halfway up the Alm, the cottage was luckily protected from the mighty winds. Had it been exposed to the tempests, it would have been a doubtful habitation in the state of decay it was in. Even as it was, the doors and windows rattled, and the old rafters shook when the south wind swept the mountain side. If the hut had stood on the Alm top, the wind would have blown it down the valley without much ado when the storm season came. Here lived Peter the goatherd, a boy 11 years old, who daily fetched the goats from the village and drove them up the mountain to the short and luscious grasses of the pastures. Peter raced down in the evening with the light-footed little goats. When he whistled sharply through his fingers, every owner would come and get his or her goat. These owners were mostly small boys and girls, and as the goats were friendly, they did not fear them. That was the only time Peter spent with other children. The rest of the day the animals were his sole companions. At home lived his mother and an old blind grandmother, but he only spent enough time in the hut to swallow his bread and milk for breakfast and the same repast for supper. After that, he sought his bed to sleep. He always left early in the morning, and at night he came home late, so that he could be with his friends as long as possible. His father had met with an accident some years ago. He also had been called Peter the goatherd. His mother, whose name was Brigida, was called Goatherd Peter's wife, and his blind grandmother was called by young and old from many miles about just grandmother. Dita waited about 10 minutes to see if the children were coming up behind with the goats. As she could not find them anywhere, she climbed up a little higher to get a better view down the valley from there, and peered from side to side with marks of great impatience on her countenance. The children in the meantime were ascending slowly in a zigzag way, Peter always knowing where to find all sorts of good grazing places for his goats where they could nibble. Thus they strayed from side to side. The poor little girl had followed the boy only with the greatest effort, and she was panting in her heavy clothes. She was so hot and uncomfortable that she only climbed by exerting all her strength. She did not say anything but looked enviously at Peter, who jumped about so easily in his light trousers and bare feet. She envied even more the goats that climbed over bushes, stones, and steep inclines with their slender legs. Suddenly sitting down on the ground, the child swiftly took off her shoes and stockings. Getting up, she undid the heavy shawl and the 2 little dresses. Out she slipped without more ado and stood up in only a light petticoat. In sheer delight at the relief, she threw up her dimpled arms that were bare up to her short sleeves. To save the trouble of carrying them, her aunt had dressed her in her Sunday clothes over her workday garments. Heidi arranged her dresses neatly in a heap and joined Peter and the goats. She was now as light-footed as any of them. When Peter, who had not paid much attention, saw her suddenly in her light attire, he grinned. Looking back, he saw the little heap of dresses on the ground, and then he grinned yet more, till his mouth seemed to reach from ear to ear. But he said never a word. The child, feeling free and comfortable, started to converse with Peter, and he had to answer many questions. She asked him how many goats he had, and where he led them, what he did with them when he got there, and so forth. At last the children reached the summit in front of the hut. When Dita saw the little party of climbers, she cried out shrilly, "Heidi, what have you done? What a sight you are! Where are your dresses and your shawl? Are the new shoes gone that I just bought for you, and the new stockings that I made myself? Where are they all, Heidi?" The child quietly pointed down and said, "There." The aunt followed the direction of her finger, and descried a little heap with a small red dot in the middle, which she recognized as the shawl. "Unlucky child," Dita said excitedly. "What does all this mean? Why have you taken your things all off?" "Because I do not need them," said the child, not seeming in the least repentant of her deed. "How can you be so stupid, Heidi? Have you lost your senses?" The aunt went on, in a tone of mingled vexation and reproach. "Who do you think will go way down there to fetch those things up again? It is half an hour's walk. Please, Peter, run down and get them. Do not stand and stare at me as if you were glued to the spot." "I am late already," replied Peter, and stood without moving from the place where, with his hands in his trousers pockets, he had witnessed the violent outbreak of Heidi's aunt. "There you are, standing and staring, but that won't get you further," said Dita. "I'll give you this if you go down." With that she held a 5-penny piece under his eyes. That made Peter start, and in a great hurry he ran down the straightest path. He arrived again in so short a time that Dita had to praise him and gave him her little coin without delay. He did not often get such a treasure, and therefore his face was beaming, and he laughingly dropped the money deep into his pocket. "If you are going up to the uncle, as we are, you can carry the pack till we get there," said Dita. They still had to climb a steep ascent that lay behind Peter's hut. The boy readily took the things and followed Dita, his left arm holding the bundle and his right swinging the stick. Heidi jumped along gaily by his side with the goats. After 3/4 of an hour, they reached the height where the hut of the old man stood on a prominent rock, exposed to every wind, but bathed in the full sunlight. From there, you could gaze far down into the valley. Behind the hut stood 3 old fir trees with great shaggy branches. Further back, the old gray rocks rose high and sheer. Above them, you could see green and fertile pastures, till at last the stony boulders reached the bare, steep cliffs. Overlooking the valley, the uncle had made himself a bench by the side of the hut. Here he sat, with his pipe between his teeth and both hands resting on his knees. He quietly watched the children climbing up with the goats and Aunt Dita behind them, for the children had caught up to her long ago. Heidi reached the top first, and approaching the old man, she held out her hand to him and said, "Good evening, grandfather." "Well, well, what does that mean?" replied the old man in a rough voice. Giving her his hand for only a moment, he watched her with a long and penetrating look from under his bushy brows. Heidi gazed back at him with an unwinking glance and examined him with much curiosity, for he was strange to look at, with his thick, gray beard and shaggy eyebrows that met in the middle like a thicket. Heidi's aunt had arrived in the meantime with Peter, who was eager to see what was going to happen. "Good day to you, uncle," said Dita as she approached. "This is Tobias's and Adelhaide's child. You won't be able to remember her, because last time you saw her she was scarcely a year old." "Why do you bring her here?" asked the uncle, and turning to Peter he said, "Get away and bring my goats. How late you are already." Peter obeyed and disappeared on the spot. The uncle had looked at him in such a manner that he was glad to go. "Uncle, I have brought the little girl for you to keep," said Dita. "I have done my share these last 4 years, and now it is your turn to provide for her." The old man's eyes flamed with anger. "Indeed," he said, "what on earth shall I do when she begins to whine and cry for you? Small children always do, and then I'll be helpless." "You'll have to look out for that," Dita retorted. "When the little baby was left in my hands a few years ago, I had to find out how to care for the little innocent myself, and nobody told me anything. I already had mother on my hands, and there was plenty for me to do. You can't blame me if I want to earn some money now. If you can't keep the child, you can do with her whatever you please. If she comes to harm, you are responsible, and I am sure you do not want to burden your conscience any further." Dita had said more in her excitement than she had intended, just because her conscience was not quite clear. The uncle had risen during her last words, and now he gave her such a look that she retreated a few steps. Stretching out his arm in a commanding gesture, he said to her, "Away with you! Begone! Stay wherever you came from and don't venture soon again into my sight." Dita did not have to be told twice. She said goodbye to Heidi and farewell to the uncle and started down the mountain. Like steam, her excitement seemed to drive her forward, and she ran down at a tremendous rate. The people in the village called to her now more than they had on her way up, because they all were wondering where she had left the child. They were well acquainted with both and knew their history. When she heard from door and windows, "Where is the child? Where have you left her, Dita?" And so forth, she answered more and more reluctantly, "Up with the uncle, with the uncle." She became much provoked because the women called to her from every side. How could you do it? The poor little creature. The idea of leaving such a helpless child up there. And over again. The poor little dear. Dita ran as quickly as she could and was glad when she heard no more calls because, to tell the truth, she herself was uneasy. Her mother had asked her on her deathbed to care for Heidi. But she consoled herself with the thought that she would be able to do more for the child if she could earn some money. She was very glad to go away from people who interfered in her affairs, and looked forward with great delight to her new place. Chapter 2. With the grandfather. After Dita had disappeared, the uncle sat down again on the bench, blowing big clouds of smoke out of his pipe. He did not speak, but kept his eyes fastened on the ground. In the meantime, Heidi looked about her, and discovering the goat shed, peeped in. Nothing could be seen inside. Searching for some more interesting thing, she saw the 3 old fir trees behind the hut. Here the wind was roaring through the branches and the treetops were swaying to and from. Heidi stood still to listen. After the wind had ceased somewhat, she walked round the hut back to her grandfather. She found him in exactly the same position, and planting herself in front of the old man, with arms folded behind her back, she gazed at him. The grandfather, looking up, saw the child standing motionless before him. "What do you want to do now?" he asked her. "I want to see what's in the hut," replied Heidi. "Come then." And with that the grandfather got up and entered the cottage. "Take your things along," he commanded. "I do not want them any more," answered Heidi. The old man, turning about, threw a penetrating glance at her. The child's black eyes were sparkling in expectation of all the things to come. "She is not lacking in intelligence," he muttered to himself. Aloud he added, "Why don't you need them any more?" "I want to go about like the light-footed goats." "All right, you can, but fetch the things and we'll put them in the cupboard." The child obeyed the command. The old man now opened the door, and Heidi followed him into a fairly spacious room, which took in the entire expanse of the hut. In one corner stood a table and a chair, and in another the grandfather's bed. Across the room a large kettle was suspended over the hearth, and opposite to it a large door was sunk into the wall. This the grandfather opened. It was the cupboard in which all his clothes were kept. In one shelf were a few shirts, socks and towels, on another a few plates, cups and glasses, and on the top shelf Heidi could see a round loaf of bread, some bacon and cheese. In this cupboard the grandfather kept everything that he needed for his subsistence. When he opened it, Heidi pushed her things as far behind the grandfather's clothes as she could reach. She did not want them found again in a hurry. After looking around attentively in the room, she asked, "Where am I going to sleep, grandfather?" "Wherever you want to," he replied. That suited Heidi exactly. She peeped into all the corners of the room and looked at every little nook to find a cozy place to sleep. Beside the old man's bed she saw a ladder. Climbing up, she arrived at a hayloft, which was filled with fresh and fragrant hay. Through a tiny round window she could look far down into the valley. "I want to sleep up here," Heidi called down. "Oh, it is lovely here. Please come up, grandfather, and see it for yourself." "I know it," sounded from below. "I am making the bed now," the little girl called out again, while she ran busily to and from. "Oh, do come up and bring a sheet, grandfather, for every bed must have a sheet." "Is that so?" said the old man. After a while he opened the cupboard and rummaged around in it. At last he pulled out a long coarse cloth from under the shirts. It somewhat resembled a sheet, and with this he climbed up to the loft. Here a neat little bed was already prepared. On top the hay was heaped up high so that the head of the occupant would lie exactly opposite the window. The grandfather was well pleased with the arrangement. To prevent the hard floor from being felt, he made the couch twice as thick. Then he and Heidi together put the heavy sheet on, tucking the ends in well. Heidi looked thoughtfully at her fresh, new bed and said, "Grandfather, we have forgotten something." "What?" he asked. "I have no cover. When I go to bed, I always creep in between the sheet and the cover." "What shall we do if I haven't any?" asked the grandfather. "Never mind. I'll just take some more hay to cover me," Heidi reassured him, and was just going to the heap of hay when the old man stopped her. "Just wait 1 minute," he said, and went down to his own bed. From it he took a large, heavy linen bag and brought it to the child. "Isn't this better than hay?" he asked. Heidi pulled the sack to and from with all her might, but she could not unfold it, for it was too heavy for her little arms. The grandfather put the thick cover on the bed while Heidi watched him. After it was all done, she said, "What a nice bed I have now, and what a splendid cover. I only wish the evening was here that I might go to sleep in it." "I think we might eat something first," said the grandfather. "Don't you think so?" Heidi had forgotten everything else in her interest for the bed, but when she was reminded of her dinner, she noticed how terribly hungry she really was. She had had only a piece of bread and a cup of thin coffee very early in the morning before her long journey. Heidi said approvingly, "I think we might, grandfather." "Let's go down then, if we agree," said the old man, and followed close behind her. Going up to the fireplace, he pushed the big kettle aside and reached for a smaller one that was suspended on a chain. Then, sitting down on a three-legged stool, he kindled a bright fire. When the kettle was boiling, the old man put a large piece of cheese on a long iron fork and held it over the fire, turning it to and from, till it was golden brown on all sides. Heidi had watched him eagerly. Suddenly, she ran to the cupboard. When her grandfather brought a pot and the toasted cheese to the table, he found it already nicely set with 2 plates and 2 knives and the bread in the middle. Heidi had seen the things in the cupboard and knew that they would be needed for the meal. "I am glad to see that you can think for yourself," said the grandfather, while he put the cheese on top of the bread. "But something is missing yet." Heidi saw the steaming pot and ran back to the cupboard in all haste. A single little bowl was on the shelf. That did not perplex Heidi, though, for she saw 2 glasses standing behind. With those 3 things, she returned to the table. "You certainly can help yourself. Where shall you sit, though?" asked the grandfather, who occupied the only chair himself. Heidi flew to the hearth, and bringing back the little stool, sat down on it. "Now you have a seat, but it is much too low. In fact, you are too little to reach the table from my chair. Now you shall have something to eat at last." And with that the grandfather filled the little bowl with milk. Putting it on his chair, he pushed it as near to the stool as was possible, and in that way Heidi had a table before her. He commanded her to eat the large piece of bread and the slice of golden cheese. He sat down himself on a corner of the table and started his own dinner. Heidi drank without stopping, for she felt exceedingly thirsty after her long journey. Taking a long breath, she put down her little bowl. "How do you like the milk?" the grandfather asked her. "I never tasted better," answered Heidi. "Then you shall have more." And with that the grandfather filled the little bowl again. The little girl ate and drank with the greatest enjoyment. After she was through, both went out into the goat shed. Here the old man busied himself, and Heidi watched him attentively while he was sweeping and putting down fresh straw for the goats to sleep on. Then he went to the little shop alongside and fashioned a high chair for Heidi, to the little girl's greatest amazement. "What is this?" asked the grandfather. "This is a chair for me. I am sure of it because it is so high. How quickly it was made," said the child, full of admiration and wonder. "She knows what is what and has her eyes on the right place," the grandfather said to himself, while he walked around the hut, fastening a nail or a loose board here and there. He wandered about with his hammer and nails, repairing whatever was in need of fixing. Heidi followed him at every step and watched the performance with great enjoyment and attention. At last the evening came. The old fir trees were rustling and a mighty wind was roaring and howling through the treetops. Those sounds thrilled Heidi's heart and filled it with happiness and joy. She danced and jumped about under the trees, for those sounds made her feel as if a wonderful thing had happened to her. The grandfather stood under the door, watching her, when suddenly a shrill whistle was heard. Heidi stood still and the grandfather joined her outside. Down from the heights came one goat after another, with Peter in their midst. Uttering a cry of joy, Heidi ran into the middle of the flock, greeting her old friends. When they had all reached the hut, they stopped on their way and two beautiful, slender goats came out of the herd, one of them white and the other brown. They came up to the grandfather, who held out some salt in his hands to them, as he did every night. Heidi tenderly caressed first one and then the other, seeming beside herself with joy. "Are they ours, grandfather? Do they both belong to us? Are they going to the stable? Are they going to stay with us?" Heidi kept on asking in her excitement. The grandfather hardly could put in a yes, yes, surely between her numerous questions. When the goats had licked up all the salt, the old man said, "Go in, Heidi, and fetch your bowl and the bread." Heidi obeyed and returned instantly. The grandfather milked a full bowl from the white goat, cut a piece of bread for the child, and told her to eat. "Afterwards you can go to bed. If you need some shirts and other linen, you will find them in the bottom of the cupboard. Aunt Dita has left a bundle for you. Now good night, I have to look after the goats and lock them up for the night." "Good night, grandfather. Oh, please tell me what their names are," called Heidi after him. "The white one's name is Schwenli, and the brown one I call Bally," was his answer. "Good night, Schwenli. Good night, Bally," the little girl called loudly, for they were just disappearing in the shed. Heidi now sat down on the bench and took her supper. The strong wind nearly blew her from her seat, so she hurried with her meal to be able to go inside and up to her bed. She slept in it as well as a prince on his royal couch. Very soon after Heidi had gone up, before it was quite dark, the old man also sought his bed. He was always up in the morning with the sun, which rose early over the mountainside in those summer days. It was a wild, stormy night. The hut was shaking in the gusts and all the boards were creaking. The wind howled through the chimney and the old fir trees shook so strongly that many a dry branch came crashing down. In the middle of the night the grandfather got up, saying to himself, "I am sure she is afraid." Climbing up the ladder, he went up to Heidi's bed. The first moment everything lay in darkness, when all of a sudden the moon came out behind the clouds and sent his brilliant light across Heidi's bed. Her cheeks were burning red, and she lay peacefully on her round and chubby arms. She must have had a happy dream, for she was smiling in her sleep. The grandfather stood and watched her till a cloud flew over the moon and left everything in total darkness. Then he went down to seek his bed again. Chapter 3. On the pasture. Heidi was awakened early next morning by a loud whistle. Opening her eyes, she saw her little bed and the hay beside her bathed in golden sunlight. For a short while she did not know where she was, but when she heard her grandfather's deep voice outside, she recollected everything. She remembered how she had come up the mountain the day before and left old Ursula, who was always shivering with cold and sat near the stove all day. While Heidi lived with Ursula, she had always been obliged to keep in the house, where the old woman could see her. Being deaf, Ursula was afraid to let Heidi go outdoors, and the child had often fretted in the narrow room and had longed to run outside. She was therefore delighted to find herself in her new home and hardly could wait to see the goats again. Jumping out of bed, she put on her few things and in a short time went down the ladder and ran outside. Peter was already there with his flock, waiting for Schwenli and Bally, whom the grandfather was just bringing to join the other goats. "Do you want to go with him to the pasture?" asked the grandfather. "Yes," cried Heidi, clapping her hands. "Go now and wash yourself first, for the son will laugh at you if he sees how dirty you are. Everything is ready there for you," he added, pointing to a large tub of water that stood in the sun. Heidi did as she was told, and washed and rubbed herself till her cheeks were glowing. In the meanwhile, the grandfather called to Peter to come into the hut and bring his bag along. The boy followed the old man, who commanded him to open the bag in which he carried his scanty dinner. The grandfather put into the bag a piece of bread and a slice of cheese. that were easily twice as large as those the boy had in the bag himself. "The little bowl goes in, too," said the uncle, "for the child does not know how to drink straight from the goat, the way you do. She is going to stay with you all day, therefore milk 2 bowls full for her dinner. Look out that she does not fall over the rocks. Do you hear?" Just then Heidi came running in. "Grandfather, can the sun still laugh at me?" she asked. The child had rubbed herself so violently with the coarse towel which the grandfather had put beside the tub that her face, neck, and arms were as red as a lobster. With a smile, the grandfather said, "No, he can't laugh any more now, but when you come home tonight you must go into the tub like a fish. When one goes about like the goats, one gets dirty feet. Be off." They started merrily up the Alp. A cloudless, deep blue sky looked down on them, for the wind had driven away every little cloud in the night. The fresh green mountainside was bathed in brilliant sunlight, and many blue and yellow flowers had opened. Heidi was wild with joy and ran from side to side. In one place she saw big patches of fine red primroses, on another spot blue gentians sparkled in the grass, and everywhere the golden rock roses were nodding to her. In her transport at finding such treasures, Heidi even forgot Peter and his goats. She ran far ahead of him and then strayed away off to one side, for the sparkling flowers tempted her here and there. Picking whole bunches of them to take home with her, she put them all into her little apron. Peter, whose round eyes could only move about slowly, had a hard time looking out for her. The goats were even worse, and only by shouting and whistling, especially by swinging his rod, could he drive them together. "Heidi, where are you now?" he called quite angrily. "Here," it sounded from somewhere. Peter could not see her, for she was sitting on the ground behind a little mound, which was covered with fragrant flowers. The whole air was filled with their perfume, and the child drew it in long breaths. "Follow me now," Peter called out. "The grandfather has told me to look out for you, and you must not fall over the rocks." "Where are they?" asked Heidi without even stirring. "Way up there, and we have still far to go. If you come quickly, we may see the eagle there and hear him shriek." That tempted Heidi, and she came running to Peter, with her apron full of flowers. "You have enough now," he declared. "If you pick them all today, there won't be any left tomorrow." Heidi admitted that, besides which she had her apron already full. From now on she stayed at Peter's side. The goats, scenting the pungent herbs, also hurried up without delay. Peter generally took his quarters for the day at the foot of a high cliff, which seemed to reach far up into the sky. Overhanging rocks on one side made it dangerous, so that the grandfather was wise to warn Peter. After they had reached their destination, the boy took off his bag, putting it in a little hollow in the ground. The wind often blew in violent gusts up there, and Peter did not want to lose his precious load. Then he lay down in the sunny grass, for he was very tired. Heidi, taking off her apron, rolled it tightly together and put it beside Peter's bag. Then, sitting down beside the boy, she looked about her. Far down she saw the glistening valley. A large field of snow rose high in front of her. Heidi sat a long time without stirring, with Peter asleep by her side and the goats climbing about between the bushes. A light breeze fanned her cheek, and those big mountains about her made her feel happy as never before. She looked up at the mountain tops till they all seemed to have faces, and soon they were familiar to her, like old friends. Suddenly she heard a loud, sharp scream, and looking up she beheld the largest bird she had ever seen, flying above her. With outspread wings, he flew in large circles over Heidi's head. "Wake up, Peter," Heidi called. "Look up, Peter, and see the eagle there." Peter got wide awake, and then they both watched the bird breathlessly. It rose higher and higher into the azure, till it disappeared at last behind the mountain peak. "Where has it gone?" Heidi asked. "Home to its nest," was Peter's answer. "Oh, does it really live way up there? How wonderful that must be. But tell me why it screams so loud," Heidi inquired. "Because it has to," Peter replied. "Oh, let's climb up there and see its nest," implored Heidi, but Peter, expressing decided disapproval in his voice, answered, oh dear, not even goats could climb up there. Grandfather has told me not to let you fall down the rocks, so we can't go." Peter now began to call loudly and to whistle, and soon all the goats were assembled on the green field. Heidi ran into their midst, for she loved to see them leaping and playing about. Peter, in the meantime, was preparing dinner for Heidi and himself by putting her large pieces on one side and his own small ones on the other. Then he milked Bailey and put the full bowl in the middle. When he was ready, he called to the little girl, but it took some time before she obeyed his call. "Stop jumping now," said Peter, "and sit down, your dinner is ready." "Is this milk for me?" she inquired. "Yes, it is. Those large pieces also belong to you. When you are through with the milk, I'll get you some more. After that, I'll get mine." "What milk do you get?" Heidi inquired. "I get it from my own goat, that speckled one over there. But go ahead and eat," Peter commanded again. Heidi obeyed, and when the bowl was empty, he filled it again. Breaking off a piece of bread for herself, she gave Peter the rest, which was still bigger than his own portion had been. She handed him also the whole slice of cheese, saying, "You can eat that, I have had enough." Peter was speechless with surprise, for it would have been impossible for him ever to give up any of his share. Not taking Heidi in earnest, he hesitated till she put the things on his knees. Then he saw she really meant it, and he seized his prize. Nodding his thanks to her, he ate the most luxurious meal he had ever had in all his life. Heidi was watching the goats in the meantime, and asked Peter for their names. The boy could tell them all to her, for their names were about the only thing he had to carry in his head. She soon knew them, too, for she had listened attentively. One of them was the Big Turk, who tried to stick his big horns into all the others. Most of the goats ran away from their rough comrade. The bold Thistlefinch alone was not afraid, and running his horns 3 or 4 times into the other, so astonished the Turk with his great daring that he stood still and gave up fighting, for the Thistlefinch had sharp horns and met him in the most warlike attitude. A small, white goat, called Snowhopper, kept up bleating in the most piteous way, which induced Heidi to console it several times. Heidi at last went to the little thing again, and throwing her arms around its head, she asked, "What is the matter with you, Snowhopper? Why do you always cry for help?" The little goat pressed close to Heidi's side and became perfectly quiet. Peter was still eating, but between the swallows he called to Heidi. "She is so unhappy because the old goat has left us. She was sold to somebody in Mayenfeld 2 days ago." "Who was the old goat?" "Her mother, of course." "Where is her grandmother?" "She hasn't any." "And her grandfather?" "Hasn't any either." "Poor little Snowhopper," said Heidi, drawing the little creature tenderly to her. "Don't grieve any more. See, I am coming up with you every day now, and if there is anything the matter, you can come to me." Snowhopper rubbed her head against Heidi's shoulder and stopped bleating. When Peter had finally finished his dinner, he joined Heidi. The little girl had just been observing that Schwenli and Bailey were by far the cleanest and prettiest of the goats. They evaded the obtrusive Turk with a sort of contempt and always managed to find the greenest bushes for themselves. She mentioned it to Peter, who replied, "I know. Of course they are the prettiest, because the uncle washes them and gives them salt. He has the best stable by far." All of a sudden Peter, who had been lying on the ground, jumped up and bounded after the goats. Heidi, knowing that something must have happened, followed him. She saw him running to a dangerous abyss on the side. Peter had noticed how the rash Thistlefinch had gone nearer and nearer to the dangerous spot. Peter only just came in time to prevent the goat from falling down over the very edge. Unfortunately, Peter had stumbled over a stone in his hurry and was only able to catch the goat by one leg. The Thistlefinch, being enraged to find himself stopped in his charming ramble, bleated furiously. Not being able to get up, Peter loudly called for help. Heidi immediately saw that Peter was nearly pulling off the animal's leg. She quickly picked some fragrant herbs and holding them under the animal's nose, she said soothingly, "Come, come, Thistlefinch, and be sensible. You might fall down there and break your leg. That would hurt you horribly." The goat turned about and devoured the herbs Heidi held in her hand. When Peter got to his feet, he led back the runaway with Heidi's help. When he had the goat in safety, he raised his rod to beat it for punishment. The goat retreated shyly, for it knew what was coming. Heidi screamed loudly, "Peter, no, do not beat him. Look how scared he is." "He well deserves it," snarled Peter, ready to strike. But Heidi, seizing his arm, shouted, full of indignation, "You mustn't hurt him. Let him go." Heidi's eyes were sparkling, and when he saw her with her commanding mien, he desisted and dropped his rope. "I'll let him go if you give me a piece of your cheese again tomorrow," he said, for he wanted a compensation for his fright. "You may have it all tomorrow and every day, because I don't need it," Heidi assured him. "I shall also give you a big piece of bread if you promise never to beat any of the goats." "I don't care," growled Peter, and in that way he gave his promise. Thus the day had passed, and the sun was already sinking down behind the mountains. Sitting on the grass, Heidi looked at the bluebells and the wild roses that were shining in the last rays of the sun. The peaks also started to glow, and Heidi suddenly called to the boy, "Oh, Peter, look, everything is on fire. The mountains are burning and the sky, too. Oh, look, the moon over there is on fire, too. Do you see the mountains all in a glow? Oh, how beautiful the snow looks. Peter, the eagle's nest is surely on fire, too. Oh, look at the fir trees over there." Peter was quietly peeling his rod and looking up said to Heidi, "This is no fire, it always looks like that." "But what is it then?" asked Heidi eagerly, gazing about her everywhere. "It gets that way of itself," explained Peter. "Oh, look, everything is all rosy now. Oh, look at this mountain over there with the snow and the sharp peaks. What is its name?" "Mountains have no names," he answered. "Oh, see, how beautiful. It looks as if many, many roses were growing on those cliffs. Oh, now they are getting gray. Oh dear, the fire has gone out and it is all over. What a terrible shame," said Heidi quite despondently. "It will be the same again tomorrow," Peter reassured her. "Come now, we have to go home." When Peter had called the goats together, they started downwards. "Will it be like that every day when we are up?" asked Heidi, eagerly. "It usually is," was the reply. "What about tomorrow?" she inquired. "Tomorrow it will be like that, I am sure," Peter affirmed. That made Heidi feel happy again. She walked quietly by Peter's side, thinking over all the new things she had seen. At last, reaching the hut, they found the grandfather waiting for them on a bench under the fir trees. Heidi ran up to him and the two goats followed, for they knew their master. Peter called to her, "Come again tomorrow. Good night." Heidi gave him her hand, assuring him that she would come, and finding herself surrounded by the goats, she hugged Snowhopper a last time. When Peter had disappeared, Heidi returned to her grandfather. "Oh, grandfather, it was so beautiful. I saw the fire and the roses on the rocks, and see the many, many flowers I am bringing you." With that, Heidi shook them out of her apron. But oh, how miserable they looked. Heidi did not even know them anymore. "What is the matter with them, grandfather? They looked so different," Heidi exclaimed in her fright. "They are made to bloom in the sun and not to be shut up in an apron," said the grandfather. "Then I shall never pick them any more. Please, grandfather, tell me why the eagle screeches so loudly," asked Heidi. "First go and take a bath, while I go into the shed to get your milk. Afterwards we'll go inside together, and I'll tell you all about it during supper time." They did as was proposed, and when Heidi sat on her high chair before her milk, she asked the same question as before. "Because he is sneering at the people down below, who sit in the villages and make each other angry. He calls down to them, 'If you would go apart to live up on the heights like me, you would feel much better.'" The grandfather said these last words with such a wild voice that it reminded Heidi of the eagle's screech. "Why do the mountains have no names, grandfather?" asked Heidi. "They all have names, and if you tell me their shape, I can name them for you." Heidi described several, and the old man could name them all. The child told him now about all the happenings of the day, and especially about the wonderful fire. She asked how it came about. "The sun does it," he exclaimed. "Saying good night to the mountains, he throws his most beautiful rays to them that they may not forget him till the morning." Heidi was so much pleased with this explanation that she could hardly wait to see the sun's good-night greetings repeated. It was time now to go to bed, and Heidi slept soundly all night. She dreamt that the little snowhopper was bounding happily about on the glowing mountains with many glistening roses blooming round her. Chapter 4. In the grandmother's hut. Next morning Peter came again with his goats, and Heidi went up to the pasture with them. This happened day after day, and in this healthy life Heidi grew stronger and more sunburnt every day. Soon the autumn came, and when the wind was blowing across the mountainside, the grandfather would say, "You must stay home today, Heidi, for the wind can blow such a little thing as you down into the valley with a single gust." It always made Peter unhappy when Heidi did not come along, for he saw nothing but misfortunes ahead of him. He hardly knew how to pass his time, and besides, he was deprived of his abundant dinner. The goats were so accustomed to Heidi by this time that they did not follow Peter when she was not with him. Heidi herself did not mind staying at home, for she loved nothing better than to watch her grandfather with his saw and hammer. Sometimes the grandfather would make small round cheeses on those days, and there was no greater pleasure for Heidi than to see him stir the butter with his bare arms. When the wind would howl through the fir trees on those stormy days, Heidi would run out to the grove, thrilled and happy by the wondrous roaring in the branches. The sun had lost its vigor, and the child had to put on her shoes and stockings and her little dress. The weather got colder and colder, and when Peter came up in the morning he would blow into his hands, he was so frozen. At last even Peter could not come any more, for a deep snow had fallen overnight. Heidi stood at the window, watching the snow falling down. It kept on snowing till it reached the windows. Still it did not stop, and soon the windows could not be opened, and they were all shut in. When it had lasted for several days, Heidi thought that it would soon cover up the cottage. It finally stopped, and the grandfather went out to shovel the snow away from the door and windows, piling it up high here and there. In the afternoon, the two were sitting near the fire when noisy steps were heard outside and the door was pushed open. It was Peter, who had come up to see Heidi. Muttering, "Good evening," he went up to the fire. His face was beaming, and Heidi had to laugh when she saw little waterfalls trickling down from his person, for all the ice and snow had melted in the great heat. The grandfather now asked Peter how he got along in school. Heidi was so interested that she asked him 100 questions. Poor Peter, who was not an easy talker, found himself in great difficulty answering the little girl's inquiries, but at least it gave him leisure to dry his clothes. During this conversation, the grandfather's eyes had been twinkling, and at last he said to the boy, "Now that you have been under fire, General, you need some strengthening. Come and join us at supper." With that, the old man prepared a meal which amply satisfied Peter's appetite. It had begun to get dark, and Peter knew that it was time to go. He had said goodbye and thank you, when turning to Heidi he remarked, "I'll come next Sunday if I may. By the way, Heidi, grandmother asked me to tell you that she would love to see you." Heidi immediately approved of this idea, and her first word next morning was, "Grandfather, I must go down to grandmother. She is expecting me." 4 days later, the sun was shining, and the tight-packed frozen snow was crackling under every step. Heidi was sitting at the dinner table, imploring the old man to let her make the visit then, when he got up and, fetching down her heavy cover, told her to follow him. They went out into the glistening snow. No sound was heard, and the snow-laden fir trees shone and glittered in the sun. Heidi in her transport was running to and fro. "Grandfather, come out! Oh, look at the trees. They are all covered with silver and gold," she called to the grandfather, who had just come out of his workshop with a wide sled. Wrapping the child up in her cover, he put her on the sled, holding her fast. Off they started at such a pace that Heidi shouted for joy, for she seemed to be flying like a bird. The sled had stopped in front of Peter's hut, and Grandfather said, "Go in. When it gets dark, start on your way home." When he had unwrapped her, he turned homewards with his sled. Opening the door, Heidi found herself in a tiny, dark kitchen, and going through another door, she entered a narrow chamber. Near a table, a woman was seated, busy with mending Peter's coat, which Heidi had recognized immediately. A bent old woman was sitting in a corner, and Heidi, approaching her at once, said, "How do you do, grandmother? I have come now, and I hope I haven't kept you waiting too long." Lifting her head, the grandmother sought for Heidi's hand. Feeling it thoughtfully, she said, "Are you the little girl who lives up with the uncle? Is your name Heidi?" "Yes," Heidi replied. "The grandfather just brought me down in the sled." "How is it possible? Your hands are as warm as toast. Brigida, did the uncle really come down with the child?" Brigida, Peter's mother, had gotten up to look at the child. She said, "I don't know if he did, but I don't think so. She probably doesn't know." Heidi, looking up, said quite decidedly, "I know that grandfather wrapped me up in a cover when we coasted down together." "Peter was right after all," said the grandmother. "We never thought the child would live more than 3 weeks with him. Brigida, tell me what she looks like." "She has Adelhaide's fine limbs and black eyes, and curly hair like Tobias and the old man. I think she looks like both of them." While the women were talking, Heidi had been taking in everything. Then she said, "Grandmother, look at the shutter over there. It is hanging loose. If grandfather were here, he would fasten it. It will break the window pane. Just look at it." "What a sweet child you are," said the grandmother tenderly. "I can hear it, but I cannot see it, child. This cottage rattles and creaks, and when the wind blows, it comes in through every chink. Some day the whole house will break to pieces and fall on top of us. If only Peter knew how to mend it. We have no one else." "Why, grandmother, can't you see the shutter?" asked Heidi. "Child, I cannot see anything," lamented the old woman. "Can you see it when I open the shutter to let in the light?" "No, no, not even then. Nobody can ever show me the light again." "But you can see when you go out into the snow, where everything is bright. Come with me, grandmother, I'll show you." And Heidi, taking the old woman by the hand, tried to lead her out. Heidi was frightened and got more anxious all the time. "Just let me stay here, child. Everything is dark for me, and my poor eyes can neither see the snow nor the light." "But grandmother, does it not get light in the summer, when the sun shines down on the mountains to say good night, setting them all aflame?" "No, child, I can never see the fiery mountains anymore. I have to live in darkness always." Heidi burst out crying now and sobbed aloud. "Can nobody make it light for you? Is there nobody who can do it, grandmother? Nobody." The grandmother tried all possible means to comfort the child. It wrung her heart to see her terrible distress. It was awfully hard for Heidi to stop crying when she had once begun, for she cried so seldom. The grandmother said, "Heidi, let me tell you something. People who cannot see love to listen to friendly words. Sit down beside me and tell me all about yourself. Talk to me about your grandfather, for it has been long since I have heard anything about him. I used to know him very well." Heidi suddenly wiped away her tears, for she had had a cheering thought. "Grandmother, I shall tell grandfather about it, and I am sure he can make it light for you. He can mend your little house and stop the rattling." The old woman remained silent, and Heidi, with the greatest vivacity, began to describe her life with the grandfather. Listening attentively, the two women would say to each other sometimes, "Do you hear what she says about the uncle? Did you listen?" Heidi's tale was interrupted suddenly by a great thumping on the door, and who should come in but Peter. No sooner had he seen Heidi than he smiled, opening his round eyes as wide as possible. Heidi called, "Good evening, Peter." "Is it really time for him to come home?" exclaimed Peter's grandmother. "How quickly the time has flown. Good evening, little Peter. How is your reading going?" "Just the same," the boy replied. "Oh, dear, I was hoping for a change at last. You are nearly 12 years old, my boy." Why should there be a change? Inquired Heidi with greatest interest. I am afraid he'll never learn it after all. On the shelf over there is an old prayer book with beautiful songs. I have forgotten them all, for I do not hear them anymore. I longed that Peter should read them to me someday, but he will never be able to. Peter's mother got up from her work now, saying, I must make a light. The afternoon has passed and now it's getting dark. When Heidi heard those words, she started, and holding out her hand to all, she said, Good night. I have to go, for it is getting dark. But the anxious grandmother called out, Wait, child, don't go up alone. Go with her, Peter, and take care that she does not fall. Don't let her get cold, do you hear? Has Heidi a shawl? I haven't, but I won't be cold, Heidi called back, for she had already escaped through the door. She ran so fast that Peter could hardly follow her. The old woman frettingly called out, Brigida, run after her. Get a warm shawl, she'll freeze in this cold night. Hurry up. Brigida obeyed. The children had hardly climbed any distance when they saw the old man coming, and with a few vigorous steps he stood beside them. I am glad you kept your word, Heidi, he said, and packing her into her cover, he started up the hill, carrying the child in his arms. Brigida had come in time to see it, and told the grandmother what she had witnessed. Thank God, the old woman said. I hope she'll come again, she has done me so much good. What a soft heart she has, the darling, and how nicely she can talk. All evening the grandmother said to herself, If only he lets her come again. I have something to look forward to in this world now, thank God. Heidi could hardly wait before they reached the cottage. She had tried to talk on the way, but no sound could be heard through the heavy cover. As soon as they were inside the hut, she began. Grandfather, we must take some nails and a hammer down tomorrow. A shutter is loose in grandmother's house, and many other places shake. Everything rattles in her house. Is that so? Who says we must? Nobody told me, but I know, Heidi replied. Everything is loose in the house, and poor grandmother told me she was afraid that the house might tumble down. And grandfather, she cannot see the light. Can you help her and make it light for her? How terrible it must be to be afraid in the dark and nobody there to help you. Oh, please, grandfather, do something to help her. I know you can. Heidi had been clinging to her grandfather and looking up to him with trusting eyes. At last he said, glancing down, All right, child, we'll see that it won't rattle anymore. We can do it tomorrow. Heidi was so overjoyed at these words that she danced around the room shouting, We'll do it tomorrow. We can do it tomorrow. The grandfather, keeping his word, took Heidi down the following day with the same instructions as before. After Heidi had disappeared, he went around the house inspecting it. The grandmother, in her joy at seeing the child again, had stopped the wheel and called, Here is the child again. She has come again. Heidi, grasping her outstretched hands, sat herself on a low stool at the old woman's feet and began to chat. Suddenly violent blows were heard outside. The grandmother in her fright nearly upset the spinning wheel and screamed, Oh, God, it has come at last. The hut is tumbling down. Grandmother, don't be frightened, said the child, while she put her arms around her. Grandfather is just fastening the shutter and fixing everything for you. Is it possible? Has God not forgotten us after all? Brigida, have you heard it? Surely that is a hammer. Ask him to come in a moment if it is he, for I must thank him. When Brigida went out, she found the old man busy with putting a new beam along the wall. Approaching him, she said, Mother and I wish you a good afternoon. We are very much obliged to you for doing us such a service, and Mother would like to see you. There are few that would have done it, Uncle, and how can we thank you? That will do, he interrupted. I know what your opinion about me is. Go in, for I can find what needs mending myself. Brigida obeyed, for the uncle had a way that nobody could oppose. All afternoon the uncle hammered around. He even climbed up on the roof, where much was missing. At last he had to stop, for the last nail was gone from his pocket. The darkness had come in the meantime, and Heidi was ready to go up with him, packed warmly in his arms. Thus the winter passed. Sunshine had come again into the blind woman's life and made her days less dark and dreary. Early every morning she would begin to listen for Heidi's footsteps, and when the door was opened and the child ran in, the grandmother exclaimed every time more joyfully, "Thank God, she has come again." Heidi would talk about her life and make the grandmother smile and laugh, and in that way the hours flew by. In former times the old woman had always sighed, "Brigida, is the day not over yet?" But now she always exclaimed after Heidi's departure, "How quickly the afternoon has gone by. Don't you think so too, Brigida?" Her daughter had to assent, for Heidi had long ago won her heart. "If only God will spare us the child," the grandmother would often say. "I hope the uncle will always be kind as he is now. Does Heidi look well, Brigida?" was a frequent question, which always got a reassuring answer. Heidi also became very fond of the old grandmother, and when the weather was fair, she visited her every day that winter. Whenever the child remembered that the grandmother was blind, she would get very sad. Her only comfort was that her coming brought such happiness. The grandfather soon had mended the cottage. Often he would take down big loads of timber, which he used to good purpose. The grandmother vowed that no rattling could be heard anymore, and that, thanks to the uncle's kindness, she slept better that winter than she had done for many a year. Chapter 5. 2 Visitors. 2 winters had nearly passed. Heidi was happy, for the spring was coming again, with the soft, delicious wind that made the fir trees roar. Soon she would be able to go up to the pasture, where blue and yellow flowers greeted her at every step. She was nearly 8 years old and had learned to take care of the goats, who ran after her like little dogs. Several times the village teacher had sent word by Peter that the child was wanted in school, but the old man had not paid any attention to the message and had kept her with him as before. It was a beautiful morning in March. The snow had melted on the slopes and was going fast. Snowdrops were peeping through the ground, which seemed to be getting ready for spring. Heidi was running to and fro before the door when she suddenly saw an old gentleman, dressed in black, standing beside her. As she appeared frightened, he said kindly, "You must not be afraid of me, for I love children. Give me your hand, Heidi, and tell me where your grandfather is." "He is inside, making round wooden spoons," the child replied, opening the door while she spoke. It was the old pastor of the village, who had known the grandfather years ago. After entering, he approached the old man, saying, "Good morning, neighbor." The old man got up, surprised, and offering a seat to the visitor, said, "Good morning, Mr. Parson. Here is a wooden chair if it is good enough." Sitting down, the parson said, "It is long since I have seen you, neighbor. I have come today to talk over a matter with you. I am sure you can guess what it is about." The clergyman here looked at Heidi, who was standing near the door. "Heidi, run out to see the goats," said the grandfather, "and bring them some salt. You can stay till I come." Heidi disappeared on the spot. "The child should have come to school a year ago," the parson went on to say. "Didn't you get the teacher's warning? What do you intend to do with the child?" "I do not want her to go to school," said the old man, unrelentingly. "What do you want the child to be?" "I want her to be free and happy as a bird." "But she is human, and it is high time for her to learn something. I have come now to tell you about it so that you can make your plans. She must come to school next winter. Remember that." "I shan't do it, Pastor," was the reply. "Do you think there is no way?" the clergyman replied a little hotly. "You know the world, for you have traveled far. What little sense you show. You think I am going to send this delicate child to school in every storm and weather," the old man said excitedly. "It is a 2 hours' walk, and I shall not let her go, for the wind often howls so that it chokes me if I venture out. Did you know Adelheid, her mother? She was a sleepwalker and had fainting fits. Nobody shall compel me to let her go. I will gladly fight it out in court." You are perfectly right, said the clergyman kindly. You could not send her to school from here. Why don't you come down to live among us again? You are leading a strange life here. I wonder how you can keep the child warm in winter. She has young blood and a good cover. I know where to find good wood, and all winter I keep a fire going. I couldn't live in the village, for the people there and I despise each other. We had better keep apart. You are mistaken, I assure you. Make your peace with God, and then you'll see how happy you will be. The clergyman had risen, and holding out his hand, he said cordially, I shall count on you next winter, neighbor. We shall receive you gladly, reconciled with God and man. But the uncle replied firmly, while he shook his visitor by the hand, Thank you for your kindness, but you will have to wait in vain. God be with you, said the parson, and left him sadly. The old man was out of humor that day, and when Heidi begged to go to the grandmother, he only growled, Not today. Next day they had hardly finished their dinner when another visitor arrived. It was Heidi's Aunt Deta. She wore a hat with feathers and a dress with such a train that it swept up everything that lay on the cottage floor. While the uncle looked at her silently, Deta began to praise him and the child's red cheeks. She told him that it had not been her intention to leave Heidi with him long, for she knew she must be in his way. She had tried to provide for the child elsewhere, and at last she had found a splendid chance for her. Very rich relations of her lady, who owned the largest house in Frankfurt, had a lame daughter. This poor little girl was confined to her rolling chair and needed a companion at her lessons. Deta had heard from her lady that a sweet, quaint child was wanted as playmate and schoolmate for the invalid. She had gone to the housekeeper and told her all about Heidi. The lady, delighted with the idea, had told her to fetch the child at once. She had come now, and it was a lucky chance for Heidi, for one never knew what might happen in such a case, and who could tell? Have you finished? The old man interrupted her at last. Why, one might think I was telling you the silliest things. There is not a man in Predigan who would not thank God for such news. Bring them to somebody else, but not to me, said the uncle coldly. Deta, flaming up, replied, Do you want to hear what I think? Don't I know how old she is, 8 years old and ignorant of everything? They have told me that you refuse to send her to church and to school. She is my only sister's child, and I shall not bear it, for I am responsible. You do not care for her. How else could you be indifferent to such luck? You had better give way, or I shall get the people to back me. If I were you, I would not have it brought to court. Some things might be warmed up that you would not care to hear about. Be quiet, the uncle thundered with flaming eyes. Take her and ruin her, but do not bring her before my sight again. I do not want to see her with feathers in her hat and wicked words like yours. With long strides he went out. You have made him angry, said Heidi with a furious look. He won't be cross long, but come now, where are your things? Asked Deta. I won't come, Heidi replied. What? Deta said passionately, but changing her tone, she continued in a more friendly manner. Come now, you don't understand me. I am taking you to the most beautiful place you have ever seen. After packing up Heidi's clothes, she said again, Come, child, and take your hat. It is not very nice, but we can't help it. I shall not come, was the reply. Don't be stupid and obstinate like a goat. Listen to me. Grandfather is sending us away, and we must do what he commands, or he will get more angry still. You'll see how fine it is in Frankfurt. If you do not like it, you can come home again, and by that time grandfather will have forgiven us. Can I come home again tonight? Asked Heidi. Come now, I told you you could come back. If we get to Mayenfeld today, we can take the train tomorrow. That will make you fly home again in the shortest time. Holding the bundle, Deta led the child down the mountain. On their way they met Peter, who had not gone to school that day. The boy thought it was a more useful occupation to look for hazel rods than to learn to read, for he always needed the rods. He had had a most successful day, for he carried an enormous bundle on his shoulder. When he caught sight of Heidi and Deta, he asked them where they were going. I am going to Frankfurt with Aunt Dita, Heidi replied. But first I must see grandmother, for she is waiting. Oh no, it is too late. You can see her when you come back, but not now, said Dita, pulling Heidi along with her, for she was afraid that the old woman might detain the child. Peter ran into the cottage and hit the table with his rods. The grandmother jumped up in her fright and asked him what that meant. They have taken Heidi away, Peter said with a groan. Who has, Peter? Where has she gone? The unhappy grandmother asked. Brigida had seen Dita walking up the footpath a short while ago, and soon they guessed what had happened. With a trembling hand, the old woman opened a window and called out as loudly as she could. Dita, Dita, don't take the child away. Don't take her from us. When Heidi heard that, she struggled to get free and said, I must go to grandmother. She is calling me. But Dita would not let her go. She urged her on by saying that she might return soon again. She also suggested that Heidi might bring a lovely present to the grandmother when she came back. Heidi liked this prospect and followed Dita without more ado. After a while she asked, What shall I bring to the grandmother? You might bring her some soft white rolls, Heidi. I think the black bread is too hard for poor grandmother to eat. Yes, I know, Aunt. She always gives it to Peter, Heidi confirmed her. We must go quickly now. We might get to Frankfurt today, and then I can be back tomorrow with the rolls. Heidi was running now, and Dita had to follow. She was glad enough to escape the questions that people might ask her in the village. People could see that Heidi was pulling her along, so she said, I can't stop. Don't you see how the child is hurrying? We have still far to go, whenever she heard from all sides. Are you taking her with you? Is she running away from the uncle? What a wonder she is still alive. What red cheeks she has, and so on. Soon they had escaped and had left the village far behind them. From that time on, the uncle looked more angry than ever when he came to the village. Everybody was afraid of him, and the women would warn their children to keep out of his sight. He came down but seldom, and then only to sell his cheese and buy his provisions. Often people remarked how lucky it was that Heidi had left him. They had seen her hurrying away, so they thought that she had been glad to go. The old grandmother alone stuck to him faithfully. Whenever anybody came up to her, she would tell them what good care the old man had taken of Heidi. She also told them that he had mended her little house. These reports reached the village, of course, but people only half believed them, for the grandmother was infirm and old. She began her days with sighing again. All happiness has left us with the child. The days are so long and dreary, and I have no joy left. If only I could hear Heidi's voice before I die, the poor old woman would exclaim, day after day. Chapter 6. A new chapter with new things. In a beautiful house in Frankfurt lived a sick child by the name of Clara Sesemann. She was sitting in a comfortable rolling chair, which could be pushed from room to room. Clara spent most of her time in the study, where long rows of bookcases lined the walls. This room was used as a living room, and here she was also given her lessons. Clara had a pale, thin face with soft blue eyes, which at that moment were watching the clock impatiently. At last she said, "Oh, Miss Rottenmeier, isn't it time yet?" The lady so addressed was the housekeeper, who had lived with Clara since Mrs. Sesamann's death. Miss Rottenmeier wore a peculiar uniform with a long cape and a high cap on her head. Clara's father, who was away from home a great deal, left the entire management of the house to this lady, on the condition that his daughter's wishes should always be considered. While Clara was waiting, Dita had arrived at the front door with Heidi. She was asking the coachman who had brought her if she could go upstairs. "That's not my business," grumbled the coachman. "You must ring for the butler." Sebastian, the butler, a man with large brass buttons on his coat, soon stood before her. "May I see Miss Rottenmeier?" Dita asked. "That's not my business," the butler announced. "Ring for Tinette, the maid." With that, he disappeared. Dita, ringing again, saw a girl with a brilliant white cap on her head coming down the stairway. The maid stopped halfway down and asked scornfully, What do you want? Dita repeated her wish again. Tynette told her to wait while she went upstairs, but it did not take long before the two were asked to come up. Following the maid, they found themselves in the study. Dita held on to Heidi's hand and stayed near the door. Miss Rottenmeier, slowly getting up, approached the newcomers. She did not seem pleased with Heidi, who wore her hat and shawl and was looking up at the lady's headdress with innocent wonder. "What is your name?" the lady asked. "Heidi," was the child's clear answer. "What? Is that a Christian name? What name did you receive in baptism?" inquired the lady again. "I don't remember that anymore," the child replied. "What an answer! What does that mean?" said the housekeeper, shaking her head. "Is the child ignorant or pert, Miss Dita?" "I shall speak for the child, if I may, madam," Dita said, after giving Heidi a little blow for her unbecoming answer. "The child has never been in such a fine house and does not know how to behave. I hope the lady will forgive her manners. She is called Adelheid after her mother, who was my sister." "Oh, well, that is better. But Miss Dita, the child seems peculiar for her age. I thought I told you that Miss Clara's companion would have to be 12 years old like her to be able to share her studies. How old is Adelheid?" "I am sorry, but I am afraid she is somewhat younger than I thought. I think she is about 10 years old." "Grandfather said that I was 8 years old," said Heidi now. Dita gave her another blow, but as the child had no idea why, she did not get embarrassed. "What, only 8 years old?" Miss Rottenmeier exclaimed indignantly. "How can we get along? What have you learned? What books have you studied?" "None," said Heidi. "But how did you learn to read?" "I can't read and Peter can't do it either," Heidi retorted. "For mercy's sake, you cannot read," cried the lady in her surprise. "How is it possible? What else have you studied?" "Nothing," replied Heidi truthfully. "Miss Dita, how could you bring this child?" said the housekeeper when she was more composed. Dita, however, was not easily intimidated and said, "I am sorry, but I thought this child would suit you. She is small, but older children are often spoilt and not like her. I must go now, for my mistress is waiting. As soon as I can, I'll come to see how the child is getting along." With a bow, she was outside, and with a few quick steps hurried downstairs. Miss Rottenmeier followed her and tried to call her back, for she wanted to ask Dita a number of questions. Heidi was still standing on the same spot. Clara had watched the scene and called to the child now to come to her. Heidi approached the rolling chair. "Do you want to be called Heidi or Adelheid?" asked Clara. "My name is Heidi and nothing else," was the child's answer. "I'll call you Heidi then, for I like it very much," said Clara. "I have never heard the name before. What curly hair you have. Was it always like that?" "I think so." "Did you like to come to Frankfurt?" asked Clara again. "Oh, no, but then I am going home again tomorrow, and shall bring grandmother some soft white rolls," Heidi explained. "What a curious child you are," said Clara. "You have come to Frankfurt to stay with me, don't you know that? We shall have our lessons together, and I think it will be great fun when you learn to read. Generally, the morning seems to have no end, for Mr. Candidate comes at 10 and stays till 2. That is a long time, and he has to yawn himself. He gets so tired." Miss Rottenmeier and he both yawn together behind their books, but when I do it, Miss Rottenmeier makes me take cod liver oil and says that I am ill. So I must swallow my yawns, for I hate the oil. What fun it will be now, when you learn to read." Heidi shook her head doubtfully at these prospects. "Everybody must learn to read, Heidi. Mr. Candidate is very patient and will explain it all to you. You won't know what he means at first, for it is difficult to understand him. It won't take long to learn, though, and then you will know what he means." When Miss Rottenmeier found that she was unable to recall Dita, she came back to the children. She was in a very excited mood, for she felt responsible for Heidi's coming and did not know how to cancel this unfortunate step. She soon got up again to go to the dining room, criticizing the butler and giving orders to the maid. Sebastian, not daring to show his rage otherwise, noisily opened the folding doors. When he went up to Clara's chair, he saw Heidi watching him intently. At last, she said, "You look like Peter." Miss Rottenmeier was horrified with this remark and sent them all into the dining room. After Clara was lifted onto her chair, the housekeeper sat down beside her. Heidi was motioned to sit opposite the lady. In that way they were placed at the enormous table. When Heidi saw a roll on her plate, she turned to Sebastian and, pointing at it, asked, "Can I have this?" Heidi had already great confidence in the butler, especially on account of the resemblance she had discovered. The butler nodded, and when he saw Heidi put the bread in her pocket, could hardly keep from laughing. He came to Heidi now with a dish of small baked fishes. For a long time the child did not move. Then, turning her eyes to the butler, she said, "Must I eat that?" Sebastian nodded, but another pause ensued. "Why don't you give it to me?" the child quietly asked, looking at her plate. The butler, hardly able to keep his countenance, was told to place the dish on the table and leave the room. When he was gone, Miss Rottenmeier explained to Heidi with many signs how to help herself at table. She also told her never to speak to Sebastian unless it was important. After that, the child was told how to accost the servants and the governess. When the question came up of how to call Clara, the older girl said, "Of course you shall call me Clara." A great many rules followed now about behavior at all times, about the shutting of doors and about going to bed, and 100 other things. Poor Heidi's eyes were closing, for she had risen at 5 that morning, and leaning against her chair she fell asleep. When Miss Rottenmeier had finished instructions, she said, "I hope you will remember everything, Adelheid. Did you understand me?" "Heidi went to sleep a long time ago," said Clara, highly amused. "It is atrocious what I have to bear with this child," exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier, ringing the bell with all her might. When the 2 servants arrived, they were hardly able to rouse Heidi enough to show her to her bedroom. Chapter 7. Miss Rottenmeier has an uncomfortable day. When Heidi opened her eyes next morning, she did not know where she was. She found herself on a high white bed in a spacious room. Looking around, she observed long white curtains before the windows, several chairs, and a sofa covered with cretonne. In a corner, she saw a washstand with many curious things standing on it. Suddenly, Heidi remembered all the happenings of the previous day. Jumping out of bed, she dressed in a great hurry. She was eager to look at the sky and the ground below, as she had always done at home. What was her disappointment when she found that the windows were too high for her to see anything except the walls and windows opposite. Trying to open them, she turned from one to the other, but in vain. The poor child felt like a little bird that is placed in a glittering cage for the first time. At last she had to resign herself, and sat down on a low stool, thinking of the melting snow on the slopes and the first flowers of spring that she had hailed with such delight. Suddenly, Tynette opened the door and said curtly, "Breakfast's ready." Heidi did not take this for a summons, for the maid's face was scornful and forbidding. She was waiting patiently for what would happen next, when Miss Rottenmeier burst into the room, saying, "What is the matter, Adelheid? Didn't you understand? Come to breakfast." Heidi immediately followed the lady into the dining room, where Clara greeted her with a smile. She looked much happier than usual, for she expected new things to happen that day. When breakfast had passed without disturbance, the 2 children were allowed to go into the library together and were soon left alone. "How can I see down to the ground?" Heidi asked. "Open a window and peep out," replied Clara, amused at the question. "But it is impossible to open them," Heidi said sadly. "Oh, no. You can't do it and I can't help you either, but if you ask Sebastian, he'll do it for you." Heidi was relieved. The poor child had felt like a prisoner in her room. Clara now asked Heidi what her home had been like, and Heidi told her gladly about her life in the hut. The tutor had arrived in the meantime, but he was not asked to go to the study as usual. Miss Rottenmeier was very much excited about Heidi's coming and all the complications that arose therefrom. She was really responsible for it, having arranged everything herself. She presented the unfortunate case before the teacher, for she wanted him to help her to get rid of the child. Mr. Candidate, however, was always careful of his judgments and not afraid of teaching beginners. When the lady saw that he would not side with her, she let him enter the study alone, for the ABC held great horrors for her. While she considered many problems, a frightful noise as of something falling was heard in the adjoining room, followed by a cry to Sebastian for help. Running in, she beheld a pile of books and papers on the floor, with the table cover on top. A black stream of ink flowed across the length of the room. Heidi had disappeared. "There!" Miss Rottenmeier exclaimed, wringing her hands. "Everything drenched with ink. Did such a thing ever happen before? This child brings nothing but misfortunes on us." The teacher was standing up, looking at the devastation, but Clara was highly entertained by these events and said, "Heidi has not done it on purpose and must not be punished. In her hurry to get away, she caught on the table cover and pulled it down. I think she must never have seen a coach in all her life, for when she heard a carriage rumbling by, she rushed out like mad. Didn't I tell you, Mr. Candidate, that she has no idea whatever about behavior? She does not even know that she has to sit quiet at her lessons. But where has she gone? What would Mr. Sesamon say if she should run away?" When Miss Rottenmeier went downstairs to look for the child, she saw her standing at the open door, looking down the street. "What are you doing here? How can you run away like that?" scolded Miss Rottenmeier. "I heard the fir trees rustle, but I can't see them and do not hear them anymore," replied Heidi, looking in great perplexity down the street. The noise of the passing carriage had reminded her of the roaring of the south wind on the Alp. "Fir trees, what nonsense! We are not in a wood. Come with me now to see what you have done." When Heidi saw the devastation that she had caused, she was greatly surprised, for she had not noticed it in her hurry. "This must never happen again," said the lady sternly. "You must sit quiet at your lessons. If you get up again, I shall tie you to your chair. Do you hear me?" Heidi understood and gave a promise to sit quietly during her lessons from that time on. After the servants had straightened the room, it was late, and there was no more time for studies. Nobody had time to yawn that morning. In the afternoon, while Clara was resting, Heidi was left to herself. She planted herself in the hall and waited for the butler to come upstairs with the silver things. When he reached the head of the stairs, she said to him, "I want to ask you something." She saw that the butler seemed angry, so she reassured him by saying that she did not mean any harm. "All right, miss, what is it?" "My name is not Miss. Why don't you call me Heidi?" "Miss Rottenmeier told me to call you Miss." "Did she? Well then, it must be so. I have 3 names already," sighed the child. "What can I do for you?" asked Sebastian now. "Can you open a window for me?" "Certainly," he replied. Sebastian got a stool for Heidi, for the windowsill was too high for her to see over. In great disappointment, Heidi turned her head away. "I don't see anything but a street of stone. Is it the same way on the other side of the house?" "Yes." "Where do you go to look far down on everything?" "On a church tower. Do you see that one over there with the golden dome? From there you can overlook everything." Heidi immediately stepped down from the stool and ran downstairs. Opening the door, she found herself in the street, but she could not see the tower anymore. She wandered on from street to street, not daring to accost any of the busy people. Passing a corner, she saw a boy who had a barrel organ on his back and a curious animal on his arm. Heidi ran to him and asked, "Where is the tower with the golden dome?" "Don't know," was the reply. "Who can tell me?" "Don't know." "Can you show me another church with a tower?" "Of course I can." "Then come and show me." "What are you going to give me for it?" said the boy, holding out his hand. Heidi had nothing in her pocket but a little flower picture. Clara had only given it to her this morning, so she was loath to part with it. The temptation to look far down into the valley was too great for her, though, and she offered him the gift. The boy shook his head, to Heidi's satisfaction. What else do you want? Money. I have none, but Clara has some. How much must I give you? 20 pennies. All right, but come. While they were wandering down the street, Heidi found out what a barrel organ was, for she had never seen one. When they arrived before an old church with a tower, Heidi was puzzled what to do next, but having discovered a bell, she pulled it with all her might. The boy agreed to wait for Heidi and show her the way home if she gave him a double fee. The lock creaked now from inside, and an old man opened the door. In an angry voice, he said, "How do you dare to ring for me? Can't you see that it is only for those who want to see the tower?" "But I do," said Heidi. "What do you want to see? Did anybody send you?" asked the man. "No, but I want to look down from up there." "Get home and don't try it again." With that, the tower keeper was going to shut the door, but Heidi held his coattails and pleaded with him to let her come. The tower keeper looked at the child's eyes, which were nearly full of tears. "All right, come along, if you care so much," he said, taking her by the hand. The two climbed up now many, many steps, which got narrower all the time. When they had arrived on top, the old man lifted Heidi up to the open window. Heidi saw nothing but a sea of chimneys, roofs and towers, and her heart sank. "Oh, dear, it's different from the way I thought it would be," she said. "There, what could such a little girl know about a view? We'll go down now, and you must promise never to ring at my tower any more." On their way, they passed an attic, where a large gray cat guarded her new family in a basket. This cat caught half a dozen mice every day for herself, for the old tower was full of rats and mice. Heidi gazed at her in surprise and was delighted when the old man opened the basket. "What charming kittens, what cunning little creatures!" she exclaimed in her delight when she saw them crawling about, jumping and tumbling. "Would you like to have one?" the old man asked. "For me, to keep?" Heidi asked, for she could not believe her ears. "Yes, of course. You can have several if you have room for them," the old man said, glad to find a good home for the kittens. How happy Heidi was. Of course there was enough room in the huge house, and Clara would be delighted when she saw the cunning things. "How can I take them with me?" the child asked, after she had tried in vain to catch one. "I can bring them to your house, if you tell me where you live," said Heidi's new friend, while he caressed the old cat who had lived with him many years. "Bring them to Mr. Sesame's house. There is a golden dog on the door, with a ring in his mouth." The old man had lived in the tower a long time and knew everybody. Sebastian also was a special friend of his. "I know," he said, "but to whom shall I send them? Do you belong to Mr. Sesame?" "No, please send them to Clara. She will like them, I am sure." Heidi could hardly tear herself away from the pretty things, so the old man put one kitten in each of her pockets to console her. After that, she went away. The boy was waiting patiently for her, and when she had taken leave of the tower keeper, she asked the boy, "Do you know where Mr. Sesame's house is?" "No," was the reply. She described it as well as she could, till the boy remembered it. Off they started, and soon Heidi found herself pulling the doorbell. When Sebastian arrived, he said, "Hurry up!" Heidi went in, and the boy was left outside, for Sebastian had not even seen him. "Come up quickly, little miss," he urged. "They are all waiting for you in the dining room. Miss Rottenmeier looks like a loaded cannon. How could you run away like that?" Heidi sat down quietly on her chair. Nobody said a word, and there was an uncomfortable silence. At last Miss Rottenmeier began with a severe and solemn voice. "I shall speak with you later, Adelheid. How can you leave the house without a word? Your behavior was very remiss. The idea of walking about till so late." "Meow," was the reply. "I didn't," Heidi began, "meow." Sebastian nearly flung the dish on the table and disappeared. "This is enough," Miss Rottenmeier tried to say, but her voice was hoarse with fury. Get up and leave the room." Heidi got up. She began again. "I made meow, meow, meow." "Heidi," said Clara now, "why do you always say meow again if you see that Miss Rottenmeier is angry?" "I am not doing it, it's the kittens," she explained. "What? Cats, kittens?" screamed the housekeeper. "Sebastian, Tinette, take the horrible things away." With that she ran into the study, locking herself in, for she feared kittens beyond anything on earth. When Sebastian had finished his laugh, he came into the room. He had foreseen the excitement, having caught sight of the kittens when Heidi came in. The scene was a very peaceful one now. Clara held the little kittens in her lap, and Heidi was kneeling beside her. They both played happily with the two graceful creatures. The butler promised to look after the newcomers and prepared a bed for them in a basket. A long time afterwards, when it was time to go to bed, Miss Rottenmeier cautiously opened the door. "Are they away?" she asked. "Yes," replied the butler, quickly seizing the kittens and taking them away. The lecture that Miss Rottenmeier was going to give Heidi was postponed to the following day, for the lady was too much exhausted after her fright. They all went quietly to bed, and the children were happy in the thought that their kittens had a comfortable bed. Chapter 8. Great disturbances in the Sesamon house. A short time after the tutor had arrived next morning, the doorbell rang so violently that Sebastian thought it must be Mr. Sesamon himself. What was his surprise when a dirty street boy, with a barrel organ on his back, stood before him. "What do you mean by pulling the bell like that?" the butler said. "I want to see Clara." "Can't you at least say, Miss Clara, you ragged urchin?" said Sebastian harshly. "She owes me 40 pennies, said the boy. "You are crazy. How do you know Miss Clara lives here?" "I showed her the way yesterday, and she promised to give me 40 pennies. "What nonsense. Miss Clara never goes out. You had better take yourself off before I send you." The boy, however, did not even budge and said, "I saw her. She has curly hair, black eyes, and talks in a funny way." "Oh," Sebastian chuckled to himself, "that was the little miss." Pulling the boy into the house, he said, "All right, you can follow me. Wait at the door till I call you, and then you can play something for Miss Clara." Knocking at the study door, Sebastian said, when he had entered, "A boy is here who wants to see Miss Clara." Clara, delighted at his interruption, said, "Can't he come right up, Mr. Candidate?" But the boy was already inside and started to play. Miss Rottenmeier was in the adjoining room when she heard the sounds. Where did they come from? Hurrying into the study, she saw the street boy playing to the eager children. "Stop, stop," she called, but in vain, for the music drowned her voice. Suddenly she made a big jump, for there, between her feet, crawled a black turtle. Only when she shrieked for Sebastian could her voice be heard. The butler came straight in, for he had seen everything behind the door, and a great scene it had been. Glued to a chair in her fright, Miss Rottenmeier called, "Send the boy away! Take them away!" Sebastian obediently pulled the boy after him. Then he said, "Here are 40 pennies from Miss Clara and 40 more for playing. It was well done, my boy." With that he closed the door behind him. Miss Rottenmeier found it wiser now to stay in the study to prevent further disturbances. Suddenly there was another knock at the door. Sebastian appeared with a large basket, which had been brought for Clara. "We had better have our lesson before we inspect it," said Miss Rottenmeier. But Clara, turning to the tutor, asked, "Oh, please, Mr. Candidate, can't we just peep in to see what it is?" "I am afraid that you will think of nothing else," the teacher began. Just then something in the basket, which had been only lightly fastened, moved, and 1, 2, 3, and still more little kittens jumped out, scampering around the room with the utmost speed. They bounded over the tutor's boots and bit his trousers. They climbed up on Miss Rottenmeier's dress and crawled around her feet. Mewing and running, they caused a frightful confusion. Clara called out in delight, "Oh, look at the cunning creatures. Look how they jump. Heidi, look at that one, and oh, see the one over there." Heidi followed them about, while the teacher shook them off. When the housekeeper had collected her wits after the great fright, she called for the servants. They soon arrived and stored the little kittens safely in the new bed. No time had been found for yawning that day, either. When Miss Rottenmeier, who had found out the culprit, was alone with the children in the evening, she began severely. Adelheid, there is only one punishment for you. I am going to send you to the cellar to think over your dreadful misdeeds, in company with the rats. A cellar held no terrors for Heidi, for in her grandfather's cellar fresh milk and the good cheese had been kept, and no rats had lodged there. But Clara shrieked, "Oh, Miss Rottenmeier, you must wait till Papa comes home, and then he can punish Heidi." The lady unwillingly replied, "All right, Clara, but I shall also speak a few words to Mr. Sesamon." With those words, she left the room. Since the child's arrival, everything had been upset, and the lady often felt discouraged, though nothing remarkable happened for a few days. Clara, on the contrary, enjoyed her companion's society, for she always did funny things. In her lessons, she could never get her letters straight. They meant absolutely nothing to her, except that they would remind her of goats and eagles. The girls always spent their evenings together, and Heidi would entertain her friend with tales of her former life, till her longing grew so great that she added, "I have to go home now. I must go tomorrow." Clara's soothing words and the prospect of more roles for the grandmother kept the child. Every day after dinner, she was left alone in her room for some hours. Thinking of the green fields at home, of the sparkling flowers on the mountains, she would sit in a corner till her desire for all those things became too great to bear. Her aunt had clearly told her that she might return, if she wished to do so, so one day she resolved to leave for the hut. In a great hurry, she packed the bread in the red shawl, and putting on her old straw hat, started off. The poor child did not get very far. At the door she encountered Miss Rottenmeier, who stared at Heidi in mute surprise. "What are you up to?" she exploded. "Haven't I forbidden you to run away? You look like a vagabond." "I was only going home," whispered the frightened child. "What, you want to run away from this house? What would Mr. Sesamon say? What is it that does not suit you here? Don't you get better treatment than you deserve? Have you ever before had such food, service, and such a room? Answer." "No," was the reply. "Don't I know that?" the furious lady proceeded. "What a thankless child you are, just idle and good for nothing." But Heidi could not bear it any longer. She loudly wailed, "Oh, I want to go home. What will poor Snowhopper do without me? Grandmother is waiting for me every day. Poor Thistlefinch gets blows if Peter gets no cheese, and I must see the sun again when he says good night to the mountains. How the eagle would screech if he saw all the people here in Frankfurt." "For mercy's sake, the child is crazy," exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier, running up the stairs. In her hurry, she had bumped into Sebastian, who was just then coming down. "Bring the unlucky child up," she called to him, rubbing her head. "All right, many thanks," answered the butler, rubbing his head, too, for he had encountered something far harder than she had. When the butler came down, he saw Heidi standing near the door with flaming eyes, trembling all over. Cheerfully he asked, "What has happened, little one? Do not take it to heart and cheer up. She nearly made a hole in my head just now, but we must not get discouraged. Oh, no. Come up with you, she said so." Heidi walked upstairs very slowly. Seeing her so changed, Sebastian said, "Don't give in, don't be so sad. You have been so courageous till now. I have never heard you cry yet. Come up now, and when the lady's away, we'll go and look at the kittens. They are running round like wild." Nodding cheerlessly, the child disappeared in her room. That night at supper, Miss Rottenmeier watched Heidi constantly, but nothing happened. The child sat as quiet as a mouse, hardly touching her food, except the little roll. Talking with the tutor next morning, Miss Rottenmeier told him her fears about Heidi's mind. But the teacher had more serious troubles still, for Heidi had not even learned her ABC in all this time. Heidi was sorely in need of some clothes, so Clara had given her some. Miss Rottenmeier was just busy arranging the child's wardrobe when she suddenly returned. "Adelheid," she said contemptuously, "what do I find? A big pile of bread in your wardrobe. I never heard the like. Yes, Clara, it is true." Then, calling Tynette, she ordered her to take away the bread and the old straw hat she had found. "No, do. I must keep my hat. The bread is for grandmother," cried Heidi in despair. "You stay here while we take the rubbish away," said the lady sternly. Heidi threw herself down now on Clara's chair and sobbed as if her heart would break. "Now I can't bring grandmother any rolls. Oh, they were for grandmother," she lamented. "Heidi, don't cry any more," Clara begged. "Listen, when you go home someday, I am going to give you as many rolls as you had and more. They will be much softer and better than those stale ones you have kept. Those were not fit to eat, Heidi. Stop now, please, and don't cry any more." Only after a long, long time did Heidi become quiet. When she had heard Clara's promise, she cried, "Are you really going to give me as many as I had?" At supper, Heidi's eyes were swollen, and it was still hard for her to keep from crying. Sebastian made strange signs to her that she did not understand. What did he mean? Later, though, when she climbed into her high bed, she found her old beloved straw hat hidden under her cover. So Sebastian had saved it for her and had tried to tell her. She crushed it for joy, and wrapping it in a handkerchief, she hid it in the furthest corner of her wardrobe. Chapter 9. The master of the house hears of strange doings. A few days afterwards, there was great excitement in the Sesamin residence, for the master of the house had just arrived. The servants were taking upstairs one load after another, for Mr. Sesamin always brought many lovely things home with him. When he entered his daughter's room, Heidi shyly retreated into a corner. He greeted Clara affectionately, and she was equally delighted to see him, for she loved her father dearly. Then he called to Heidi, "Oh, there is our little Swiss girl. Come and give me your hand. That's right. Are you good friends, my girls? Tell me now. You don't fight together, what?" "Oh no, Clara is always kind to me," Heidi replied. "Heidi has never even tried to fight, Papa," Clara quickly remarked. "That's good, I like to hear that," said the father, rising. "I must get my dinner now, for I am hungry. I shall come back soon and show you what I have brought home with me." In the dining room, he found Miss Rottenmeier surveying the table with a most tragic face. "You do not look very happy at my arrival, Miss Rottenmeier. What is the matter? Clara seems well enough," he said to her. "Oh, Mr. Sesamin, we have been terribly disappointed," said the lady. "How do you mean?" asked Mr. Sesamin, calmly sipping his wine. "We had decided, as you know, to have a companion for Clara. Knowing as I did that you would wish me to get a noble, pure child, I thought of this Swiss child, hoping she would go through life like a breath of pure air, hardly touching the earth. I think that even Swiss children are made to touch the earth, otherwise they would have to have wings. I think you understand what I mean. I have been terribly disappointed, for this child has brought the most frightful animals into the house. Mr. Candidate can tell you. The child does not look very terrible, but what do you mean?" "I cannot explain it, because she does not seem in her right mind at times." Mr. Sesamin was getting worried at last, when the tutor entered. "Oh, Mr. Candidate, I hope you will explain. Please take a cup of coffee with me and tell me about my daughter's companion. Make it short, if you please." But this was impossible for Mr. Candidate, who had to greet Mr. Sesamin first. Then he began to reassure his host about the child, pointing out to him that her education had been neglected till then, and so on. But poor Mr. Sesamin, unfortunately, did not get his answer, and had to listen to very long-winded explanations of the child's character. At last Mr. Sesamin got up, saying, "Excuse me, Mr. Candidate, but I must go over to Clara now." He found the children in the study. Turning to Heidi, who had risen at his approach, he said, "Come, little one, get me a glass of water." "Fresh water." Of course, fresh water, he replied. When Heidi had gone, he sat down near Clara, holding her hand. Tell me, little Clara, he asked. Please tell me clearly what animals Heidi has brought into the house. Is she really not right in her mind? Clara now began to relate to her father all the incidents with the kittens and the turtle, and explained Heidi's speeches that had so frightened the lady. Mr. Sesamon laughed heartily and asked Clara if she wished Heidi to remain. Of course, Papa. Since she is here, something amusing happens every day. It used to be so dull, but now Heidi keeps me company. Very good, Clara. Oh, here is your friend back again. Did you get nice fresh water? Asked Mr. Sesamon. Heidi handed him the glass and said, Yes, fresh from the fountain. You did not go to the fountain yourself, Heidi, said Clara. Certainly, but I had to get it from far. There were so many people at the first and at the second fountain. I had to go down another street, and there I got it. A gentleman with white hair sends his regards to you, Mr. Sesamon. Clara's father laughed and asked, Who was the gentleman? When he passed by the fountain and saw me there with a glass, he stood still and said, Please give me to drink, for you have a glass. To whom are you bringing the water? Then I said, I am bringing it to Mr. Sesamon. When he heard that, he laughed very loud and gave me his regards for you, with the wish that you would enjoy your drink. I wonder who it was. What did the gentleman look like? He has a friendly laugh, and wears a gold pendant with a red stone on his thick gold chain. There is a horse head on his cane. Oh, that was the doctor. That was my old doctor, exclaimed father and daughter at the same time. In the evening, Mr. Sesamon told Miss Rottenmeier that Heidi was going to remain, for the children were very fond of each other, and he found Heidi normal and very sweet. I want the child to be treated kindly, Mr. Sesamon added decidedly. Her peculiarities must not be punished. My mother is coming very soon to stay here, and she will help you to manage the child, for there is nobody in this world that my mother could not get along with, as you know, Miss Rottenmeier. Of course, I know that, Mr. Sesamon, replied the lady, but she was not very much pleased at the prospect. Mr. Sesamon only stayed 2 weeks, for his business called him back to Paris. He consoled his daughter by telling her that his mother was coming in a very few days. Mr. Sesamon had hardly left when the grandmother's visit was announced for the following day. Clara was looking forward to this visit, and told Heidi so much about her dear grandmamma that Heidi also began to call her by that name, to Miss Rottenmeier's disapproval, who thought that the child was not entitled to this intimacy. Chapter 10. The following evening great expectation reigned in the house. Tynette had put on a new cap, Sebastian was placing footstools in front of nearly every armchair, and Miss Rottenmeier walked with great dignity about the house, inspecting everything. When the carriage at last drove up, the servants flew downstairs, followed by Miss Rottenmeier in more measured step. Heidi had been sent to her room to await further orders, but it was not long before Tynette opened the door and said brusquely, Go into the study. The grandmamma, with her kind and loving way, immediately befriended the child and made her feel as if she had known her always. To the housekeeper's great mortification, she called the child Heidi, remarking to Miss Rottenmeier, If somebody's name is Heidi, I call her so. The housekeeper soon found that she had to respect the grandmother's ways and opinions. Mrs. Sesamon always knew what was going on in the house the minute she entered it. On the following afternoon, Clara was resting, and the old lady had shut her eyes for 5 minutes, when she got up again and went into the dining room. With a suspicion that the housekeeper was probably asleep, she went to this lady's room, knocking loudly on the door. After a while somebody stirred inside, and with a bewildered face Miss Rottenmeier appeared, staring at the unexpected visitor. Rottenmeier, where is the child? How does she pass her time? I want to know, said Mrs. Sesamon. She just sits in her room, not moving a finger. She has not the slightest desire to do something useful, and that is why she thinks of such absurd things that one can hardly mention them in polite society. I should do exactly the same thing if I were left alone like that. Please bring her to my room now. I want to show her some pretty books I have brought with me. That is just the trouble. What should she do with books? In all this time, she has not even learned the ABC, for it is impossible to instill any knowledge into this being. If Mr. Candidate was not as patient as an angel, he would have given up teaching her long ago. How strange! The child does not look to me like one who cannot learn the ABC, said Mrs. Sesamon. Please fetch her now. We can look at the pictures anyway. The housekeeper was going to say more, but the old lady had turned already and gone to her room. She was thinking over what she had heard about Heidi, making up her mind to look into the matter. Heidi had come and was looking with wondering eyes at the splendid pictures in the large books that Grandmamma was showing her. Suddenly she screamed aloud, for there on the picture she saw a peaceful flock grazing on a green pasture. In the middle a shepherd was standing, leaning on his crook. The setting sun was shedding a golden light over everything. With glowing eyes, Heidi devoured the scene, but suddenly she began to sob violently. The Grandmamma took her little hand in hers and said in the most soothing voice, "Come, child, you must not cry. Did this remind you of something? Now stop, and I'll tell you the story tonight. There are lovely stories in this book that people can read and tell. Dry your tears now, darling, I must ask you something. Stand up now and look at me. Now we are merry again." Heidi did not stop at once, but the kind lady gave her ample time to compose herself, saying from time to time, "Now it's all over. Now we'll be merry again." When the child was quiet at last, she said, "Tell me now how your lessons are going. What have you learnt, child, tell me." "Nothing," Heidi sighed, "but I knew that I never could learn it." "What is it that you can't learn?" "I can't learn to read. It is too hard." "What next? Who gave you this information?" "Peter told me, and he tried over and over again, but he could not do it, for it is too hard." "Well, what kind of boy is he?" "Heidi, you must not believe what Peter tells you, but try for yourself. I am sure you had your thoughts elsewhere when Mr. Candidate showed you the letters." "It's no use," Heidi said with such a tone as if she was resigned to her fate. "I am going to tell you something, Heidi," said the kind lady now. "You have not learnt to read because you have believed what Peter said. You shall believe me now, and I prophesy that you will learn it in a very short time, as a great many other children do that are like you and not like Peter. When you can read, I am going to give you this book. You have seen the shepherd on the green pasture, and then you'll be able to find out all the strange things that happened to him. Yes, you can hear the whole story, and what he does with his sheep and his goats. You would like to know, wouldn't you, Heidi?" Heidi had listened attentively, and said now with sparkling eyes, "If I could only read already." "It won't be long, I can see that. Come now and let us go to Clara." With that they both went over to the study. Since the day of Heidi's attempted flight, a great change had come over the child. She had realized that it would hurt her kind friends if she tried to go home again. She knew now that she could not leave, as her Aunt Dita had promised, for they all, especially Clara and her father and the old lady, would think her ungrateful. But the burden grew heavier in her heart, and she lost her appetite and got paler and paler. She could not get to sleep at night from longing to see the mountains with the flowers and the sunshine, and only in her dreams she would be happy. When she woke up in the morning, she always found herself on her high white bed, far away from home. Burying her head in her pillow, she would often weep a long, long time. Mrs. Sesamon had noticed the child's unhappiness, but let a few days pass by, hoping for a change. But the change never came, and often Heidi's eyes were red even in the early morning. So she called the child to her room one day and said, with great sympathy in her voice, "Tell me, Heidi, what is the matter with you? What is making you so sad?" But as Heidi did not want to appear thankless, she replied sadly, "I can't tell you." "No, can't you tell Clara perhaps?" "Oh no, I can't tell anyone," Heidi said, looking so unhappy that the old lady's heart was filled with pity. I tell you something, little girl, she continued. If you have a sorrow that you cannot tell to anyone, you can go to our Father in heaven. You can tell him everything that troubles you, and if we ask him, he can help us and take our suffering away. Do you understand me, child? Don't you pray every night? Don't you thank him for all his gifts and ask him to protect you from evil? Oh no, I never do that, replied the child. Have you never prayed, Heidi? Do you know what I mean? I only prayed with my first grandmother, but it is so long ago that I have forgotten. See, Heidi, I understand now why you are so unhappy. We all need somebody to help us, and just think how wonderful it is to be able to go to the Lord when something distresses us and causes us pain. We can tell him everything and ask him to comfort us when nobody else can do it. He can give us happiness and joy. Heidi was gladdened by these tidings and asked, Can we tell him everything, everything? Yes, Heidi, everything. The child, withdrawing her hand from the grandmamma, said hurriedly, Can I go now? Yes, of course, was the reply, and with this Heidi ran to her room. Sitting down on a stool, she folded her hands and poured out her heart to God, imploring him to help her and let her go home to her grandfather. About a week later, Mr. Candidate asked to see Mrs. Sesamin, to tell her of something unusual that had occurred. Being called to the ladies' room, he began, Mrs. Sesamin, something has happened that I never expected. And with many more words, the happy grandmamma was told that Heidi had suddenly learned to read with the utmost correctness, most rare with beginners. Many strange things happen in this world, Mrs. Sesamin remarked, while they went over to the study to witness Heidi's new accomplishment. Heidi was sitting close to Clara, reading her a story. She seemed amazed at the strange, new world that had opened up before her. At supper, Heidi found the large book with the beautiful pictures on her plate, and looking doubtfully at Grandmamma, she saw the old lady nod. Now it belongs to you, Heidi, she said. Forever, also when I am going home, Heidi inquired, confused with joy. Certainly, forever, the Grandmamma assured her. Tomorrow we shall begin to read it. But Heidi, you must not go home. No, not for many years, Clara exclaimed. Especially when Grandmamma goes away. You must stay with me. Heidi still looked at her book before going to bed that night, and this book became her dearest treasure. She would look at the beautiful pictures and read all the stories aloud to Clara. Grandmamma would quietly listen and explain something here and there, making it more beautiful than before. Heidi loved the pictures with the shepherd best of all. They told the story of the prodigal son, and the child would read and reread it till she nearly knew it all by heart. Since Heidi had learned to read and possessed the book, the days seemed to fly, and the time had come near that the grandmamma had fixed for her departure. Chapter 11. The grandmamma sent for Heidi every day after dinner, while Clara was resting and Miss Rottenmeier disappeared into her room. She talked to Heidi and amused her in various ways, showing her how to make clothes for pretty little dolls that she had brought. Unconsciously, Heidi had learned to sew, and made now the sweetest dresses and coats for the little people out of lovely materials the grandmamma would give her. Often Heidi would read to the old lady, for the oftener she read over the stories the dearer they became to her. The child lived everything through with the people in the tales and was always happy to be with them again. But she never looked really cheerful, and her eyes never sparkled merrily as before. In the last week of Mrs. Sesamin's stay, Heidi was called again to the old lady's room. The child entered with her beloved book under her arm. Mrs. Sesamin drew Heidi close to her, and laying the book aside, she said, Come, child, and tell me why you are so sad. Do you still have the same sorrow? Yes, Heidi replied. Did you confide it to our Lord? Yes. Do you pray to him every day that he may make you happy again and take your affliction away? Oh no, I don't pray any more. What do I hear, Heidi? Why don't you pray? It does not help, for God has not listened. I don't wonder, she added. For if all the people in Frankfurt pray every night, he cannot listen to them all. I am sure he has not heard me." "Really? Why are you so sure?" "Because I have prayed for the same thing many weeks, and God has not done what I have asked him to." "That is not the way, Heidi. You see, God in heaven is a good father to all of us, who knows what we need better than we do. When something we ask for is not very good for us, he gives us something much better if we confide in him and do not lose confidence in his love. I am sure what you asked for was not very good for you just now. He has heard you, for he can hear the prayers of all the people in the world at the same time, because he is God Almighty and not a mortal like us. He heard your prayers and said to himself, 'Yes, Heidi shall get what she is praying for in time.' Now, while God was looking down on you to hear your prayers, you lost confidence and went away from him. If God does not hear your prayers anymore, he will forget you also and let you go. Don't you want to go back to him, Heidi, and ask his forgiveness? Pray to him every day and hope in him that he may bring cheer and happiness to you." Heidi had listened attentively. She had unbounded confidence in the old lady, whose words had made a deep impression on her. Full of repentance, she said, "I shall go at once and ask our father to pardon me. I shall never forget him any more." "That's right, Heidi. I am sure he will help you in time if you only trust in him," the grandmother consoled her. Heidi went to her room now and prayed earnestly to God that he would forgive her and fulfill her wish. The day of departure had come, but Mrs. Sesemann arranged everything in such a way that the children hardly realized she was actually going. Still, everything was empty and quiet when she had gone, and the children hardly knew how to pass their time. Next day, Heidi came to Clara in the afternoon and said, "Can I always read to you now, Clara?" Clara assented, and Heidi began. But she did not get very far, for the story she was reading told of a grandmother's death. Suddenly she cried aloud, "Oh, now grandmother is dead," and wept in the most pitiful fashion. Whatever Heidi read always seemed real to her, and now she thought it was her own grandmother at home. Louder and louder she sobbed. "Now poor grandmother is dead and I can never see her any more, and she never got one single roll." Clara attempted to explain the mistake, but Heidi was too much upset. She pictured to herself how terrible it would be if her dear old grandfather would die too while she was far away. How quiet and empty it would be in the hut, and how lonely she would be. Miss Rottenmeier had overheard the scene, and approaching the sobbing child, she said impatiently, "Adelheid, now you have screamed enough. If I hear you again giving way to yourself in such a noisy fashion, I shall take your book away forever." Heidi turned pale at that, for the book was her greatest treasure. Quickly drying her tears, she choked down her sobs. After that, Heidi never cried again. Often she could hardly repress her sobs and was obliged to make the strangest faces to keep herself from crying out. Clara often looked at her, full of surprise, but Miss Rottenmeier did not notice them and found no occasion to carry out her threat. However, the poor child got more cheerless every day and looked so thin and pale that Sebastian became worried. He tried to encourage her at table to help herself to all the good dishes, but listlessly she would let them pass and hardly touch them. In the evening she would cry quietly, her heart bursting with longing to go home. Thus the time passed by. Heidi never knew if it was summer or winter, for the walls opposite never changed. They drove out very seldom, for Clara was only able to go a short distance. They never saw anything else than streets, houses, and busy people, no grass, no fir trees, and no mountains. Heidi struggled constantly against her sorrow, but in vain. Autumn and winter had passed, and Heidi knew that the time was coming when Peter would go up the Alp with his goats, where the flowers were glistening in the sunshine, and the mountains were all afire. She would sit down in a corner of her room and put both hands before her eyes, not to see the glaring sunshine on the opposite wall. There she would remain, eating her heart away with longing, till Clara would call for her to come. This concludes part 1 of The Serene Escape with Heidi. Thank you for your support, sweet dreams, and we'll see you in the next chapter. Sleep well.